Hey folks, welcome back. Today I am jumping on the lovely 𝗪𝗿𝗄𝗧 54321 tarot. 𝗪𝗿𝗄𝗧 tagged me in this and I'm not one to turn down a tag if I can participate. Also, I thought it would be quite a fun idea and I'm not even really sure I'm going to do a September recap video because aside from what I've done on Patreon, I only got my August one up late, not much has changed. I don't know, maybe I'll have a month off. Anyways, for those who don't watch those videos or are new here and found me through the tag, moved home, some growing pains, so if the lighting's not perfect or it's a bit reflective and stuff, then apologies. This is what I've got to work with, so I am trying to deal with it. I actually have 3 sources of light at the moment going to try and counteract the shadows. That said, 54321 tarot is 5 tarot decks, 4 books, 3 spreads. For the 2 I actually picked one of each, so 1 tarot habit and 1 piece of paraphernalia, and then 1 piece of tarot advice. So I've actually spent a couple of days thinking about how I would structure this to try and make it interesting and for the long time viewers to perhaps show some decks that I don't always show, maybe one of which I haven't shown on here yet. I don't know. So yeah, hopefully this is a fun structure. So I've added my my names for certain things. I just kind of extended upon why I chose things basically, but I have stuck to the 54321 and I have stuck to tarot. So for our 5 tarot decks, I have a tarot deck of Dark Whimsy, a tarot deck for Folkish Witchery, a tarot deck of Poetic Daydreams, a tarot deck of Impassioned Shapeshifting, and a tarot deck of Nature Decay. So they are my titles. That is how I chose, folks. So what's Dark Whimsy, you ask? Well, Dark Whimsy is the Black Salt Tarot by none other than Logan, aka Bestie of Larkin Legend. I just had to show you the box because it's gorgeous. I am biased, so it's going to be difficult for me to talk about this anyway. But I was actually saying to him the other day that even if we didn't know each other, this is my kind of tarot deck. On a really surface base, fun, aesthetic layer, initially the one thing that this brings to mind and why I called it Dark Whimsy is it's like a unicorn goth, which is something that has been sort of presented to me many a time, where I enjoy dark colours. I predominantly wear dark colours. I'm a bit gothy / grungy, but I have a bit of a thing for shiny stuff, which is not new in the community. I freaking love this whole iridescent, I don't even know if that's the right word, is it? Or is it? I don't know. We're just gonna be okay. I'm gonna take a leaf out of 𝗪𝗿𝗄𝗧's book and try and be a bit more kinder to myself when it comes to my fibro fog and just general forgetfulness thanks to my fatigue and stuff. Isn't this mage card beautiful, by the way? So anyway, that's the kind of superficial layer. I really love pip decks and pippish decks. When it actually comes to reading with it, it's such a thoughtful pip deck. So a lot of the, well, all of the pip cards, I feel like there's tiny little symbols, there's directional hints, there's lots of little symbolic bits of information just visually trying to coax you into what the 3 swords means. And I think that that's a really nice helping point for people who are perhaps, I don't know beginning, but beginners can use any deck, so that's a difficult topic in itself, but certainly it adds something for those of us who visually read as well. So look at the swords here. We've got Now these could be teardrops or blood drops, because I'm always forgetting which one. To me it's blood, but that's because it's me. And then we've got the rest of the swords are actually broken. I love that about it. That's my kind of pip deck. And then in terms of reading with it, I have been reading with it a lot lately. But honestly, this deck reads me to filth, which I know is a funny thing to say because it's still me doing the reading, but the way that I engage with each deck really changes, and the tone of that. And it's beautifully done. It very much is like mine and Logan's relationship. So perhaps there's that energetic connection that I'm picking up on as well, because it just feels like he's imbued in this, and it's loving but to the point. I do like pip decks for that straightforward element anyway. And this is one of my personifying cards or signifying cards or embodiment cards or whatever you want to call it. And they've got bangs like me, so I love them. This is my Dark Whimsy deck. Starting out strong here visually with the next one, which wasn't purposeful, but it was on top and I'm not changing it. We have my Folkish Witchery deck. I have many that fall under this, predominantly not tarot though, but this is the Cursed Auguries tarot. And this feels inherently witchy to me in the way that I am very familiar. So there are a lot of animal inclusions in this. It's another pip deck, by the way. There are a lot of kind of, I suppose, elemental focuses and what I would consider perhaps simple, accessible to some extent aids and tools to the craft. We've got apples, we've got the frog spawn, which is, again, like I said, the more animal facet of it. We've got the nails here. They kind of look a little bit like the nails I got to hang my horseshoe with. The wands are just witchy twigs, essentially, and it feels like a coming back to the roots of practice. It feels very reflective of what my practice looks like. I don't want to say more often than not, because it's still not full enough, but there's something about the simplicity of it, of the coming back to apples, and that being representative of other foods that I might always have in my kitchen, that might always be a part of my practice. The wands, it feels very connective of anything that is found that we might respectfully take from the forests. So the twigs, the stones, the things that we craft and make from those. Nails are a big part of my practice in particular. I actually did a really cool folk witch course on it to sort of enhance my my information I have in terms of like British folk witchery. And then the frogs, again, being representative of the animals that I particularly incorporate into my practice, and some nostalgia because they are the 𝗪𝗁. And when I was little, I remember watching the frogs in my grandparents' pond. Then we've got this very transformative layer of other animals such as hares for the shape-shifting snakes. The witch is sometimes depicted. We've got teeth and bones. It's all very to the crux of it. I suppose there's this kind of transition between what some traditional witchcraft looks like and some folk witchcraft, at least for me. And I freaking love it. It's such a good reader, and it's really interesting because I appreciate and understand why people feel it's a very dark deck, but honestly it feels like a very honest depiction of it. It was very much, and is still very much now for some of us, waste not, want not, you know. So there is death and decay, and it is all a part of the practice. And so whilst the pips aren't necessarily laid out in my favourite capacity, because I do have a very strong standing way of reading with pips and the numerology and the elements of everything, then it's not really so much of a problem. Also, it's linen cardstock, and I'm a fan of linen. Poetic Daydreams goes to none other than the Dark Days Tarot, which I am utterly obsessed with. It was on my wish list for so damn long, but I am enjoying this one so much. I use it a lot with the Reclaim Oracle actually, and oof, the two of them together, they really are very emotionally evocative for me, and very much a visual thing that creates visceral shifts within, which is one of the reasons that I feel like it's Poetic Daydreams. It kind of has this way that it inspires me. One of my friends actually, Kim, who I've known for a long time through the online tarot world, always wrote poetry, tarot poetry inspired by this. I've since done the same. It's this really interesting meeting of the mystical and the everyday. It's not an abstract deck, but there is just something a little sideways, I suppose, about some of the depictions in particular. It's really a hard one to describe my relationship with. It's not one that I've used to read for anyone as of yet, as far as I can remember. But there is something where it kind of reminds me of the nicest layers of my daydreams, because a lot of my actual nighttime dreams are quite heavy and, you know, me sorting through turmoil and things like that. This reminds me of when I do have a really sweet dream, or kind of when my brain goes to and starts to expand upon, and the kind of, I suppose, fantasy layers that I would love to add into my life, as would many of us, I'm sure. There's something really nurturing about it, because I don't want to say soft, and I don't think nurturing has to be soft, but yeah, there's just something poetic about it in particular. I tend to do a free card reading with it, and it's incredibly powerful, and it lasts me a long time as well. So yeah, it's a beautiful deck. Next we have my Impassioned Shapeshifting deck, which is the Story Medicine Tarot Animal Woman edition. It is very much a shapeshifting deck for me. It crosses the lines between the journeying shapeshifting work that I really have a strong affinity for, and this connection to animals, but traversing into the magical realms and the spirit realms, because I do a lot of everyday study of the animals. In fact, I nearly picked a deck and I was going to call it the zoology student, and that's kind of a lot of the animal workings that I do. But then there's this whole other layer of folklore, and if I feel up to it and when it's relevant and when I have the energy and all of that other wonderful stuff comes together, this shape-shifting, or even, like I said, just journeying with the animals. And essentially that's what this deck sort of documents. It's really, really powerful. The creator, who is the individual depicted throughout, goes and meets a different animal per major, and then through the minors there is a specific animal, and you can see her moving almost closer and closer into transformation with it. In terms of reading, this has been a really, really potent, nourishing, emotive deck for me. It's really good for me in terms of getting out of a more analytical state and getting more into an emotion focused one. A very somatic kind of deck as well. They're definitely the best ways that I can explain it, because it just feels like more of an experience when I read with this. It's not that I can't do it with any other decks, but there's something that this does for me visually that takes me into that world just a little bit further. I'm so glad that I got it. I have only read for one other person with this, and before that it was really just an individual working deck. It is just this absolute sumptuous treat, of which you would think if I loved it that much it would be out all the time, but actually I go through kind of phases with it, because after a while, like anything in practice, it isn't necessarily the focus, it's not necessarily the time, basically, but I love it, and I could just sit here and go through all the artwork, to be honest, so I will stop there. And last but not least, we have our 𝗕𝗄𝗍, which is the wooden tarot. And this is a firm, a long-term, oh, of course the rest is upside down. A firm long-term favourite of mine, and a very honest, I often say this about a few decks, the Brady Tarot's another one, and what feels like an honest depiction of nature, at least, although this is very obscure. This is another world. There are lots of eyeballs, so if you don't like that kind of thing, this is not going to be for you. It's based in reality, and yet it has this mystical layer to it, which I suppose is a nice way to summarise the tarot. You know, it can do the mundane, it can do the magical, it traverses the thresholds, and it creates these webs and this emergence that already exists, but there's an invitation into it, an enhancement of it. I really love that it gets to the crux of things as well. This was a deck that I actually started doing more pippish work with, and I owned it for a long time before I was able to efficiently read with it. And I mean efficient in the realm of private, you know, private readings. It was quite early on in my return to tarot that I got this, and I spent a lot of time looking over the pictures, just trying to make sense of what I was seeing, and then just using other tarot decks. So I didn't force read with it, and honestly, it is a really good example of what dedicating our time to a few things can achieve. Because if I had been splitting my time between as much as I do now, that I'm, you know, far more proficient in these things and far more used to adapting to different art styles and such, I never would have been able to bond with it in the same way, and I don't think the way that I read with it would have developed so nicely. That's not to say anyone should do anything a certain way, it's just I realise that now I can add a lot into the mix unless I'm feeling overwhelmed, and I do like to pare back when that's necessary. And the reason that it's 𝗕𝗄𝗍 is because it includes all facets of nature. There is no shying away from the bones and the death and the decay and what grows from the decay as well. But it is another pippish deck that I feel like some cards are less pippish, and to me it does try to give hints, but they aren't necessarily obvious for everyone. And again, we all read differently, so whether we're going to pick up on that or not is something else. We're going to move on to books now, and I will probably speed things up a little bit. I can't help myself with the decks. The books, I chose an old favourite, a new favourite, a present read, and then a tarot fiction, because I thought that might be a fun way to break it all up again. So my old favourite is Tarot and Psychology, and that is because it is the meeting of two of my worlds and two of my greatest passions. I've had this book for an incredibly long time. I really, really enjoy it. It's not perfect by any means, it's definitely dated, but for me, it's a tarot book that goes beyond tarot basics, which is the perfect sort of book for me in terms of continually referencing, and when I mean that, I mean it's worth keeping for me in my bookshelf. I don't mean I'm going to it every 5 seconds, but I really love coming back to this one. I find it really interesting. The meanings side of things is actually a really, really small portion at the back. You can see, because it's heavily thumbed from back when I was trying to really ingest the meanings, but the rest of it goes through all of these examples, and it's just interesting, basically. I'm really rubbish at describing certain books. I don't know what to say. I think it was Kellyanne Maddox who tipped me off to this in one of her videos many years ago, and it's been an absolute treasure. I'm not suggesting you have to be a psychologist or a psychotherapist to enjoy it, for sure. I don't actually think it's that dense, but I am probably not a good person to ask. Whether it's for everyone or not, I don't think so, but it's my old favourite. This is my new favourite, and it is 𝗺·𝗺𝗁𝗪 in Folk Witchcraft by Roger J. Horne. I love Roger's books. I want them all. I have a couple of them already. He really just writes in a way that I find very relatable, very accessible, just easy to digest, makes a lot of sense to me, and is rooted in a deep knowledge and respect. That is the quickest way I can describe my experience with his writing overall. He has a blog. They are not regular blog updates, sometimes perhaps only 3-4 a year maybe, but it's so good. It's so good. Anyway, so as my craft has shifted and evolved with me, folk witchcraft is one of the main ways that I would describe it. And also I really wanted to learn 𝗺·𝗺𝗪𝗪 in a way that I felt would be accessible to me to start off with. So this is the 𝗺·𝗺𝗪𝗪 book that I started with. Other recommendations are very much welcome. I am having to reread it because that's just how I function. Especially nowadays, it takes me longer, way longer than it used to really kind of ingest a practice. So of course, a part of it is going away and trying and sort of trying to expand upon things that make sense to me. I often write down keywords and bits and then try and reference those for a while, see if they sink in, and then reread. But I really love it. I think that it is, like I said, a really great introduction. It might not sync up with all of the other 𝗺·𝗺𝗪𝗪 books, but honestly, in a similar way to tarot, I don't think that everyone always agrees with everything anyway. But yeah, this is the expanded second edition as well, so worthwhile perhaps keeping an eye out for this if it's something that you're looking into. Next up we have my present read, and that's because this was a long time coming, and the reason being is a lot of people mention that this was a really key point in their tarot practice, in their tarot studies. This had absolutely nothing to do with any of mine. I grew up around tarot in a different way. I wasn't introduced to the Rider-Waite-Smith system in the kind of structured capacity that a lot of these books do, or even individuals might. When I returned to it, it still wasn't the book that I went to. I am actually quite keen to get our now departed Rachel Pollack's newest release, because I've been hearing some really interesting things about that, but that wasn't out at the time. And I saw this randomly. I had no intention of buying it, although it was kind of on the back burner, because I do like to, if I've got time, take in tarot resources, whether they're beginner or intermediate, whether they're more of a creative development or whether they're card meanings, provided I can get on with some of the text, because I just find it interesting. It's a passion of mine, so I will read all levels of information from time to time. But also, like I said, this is just one that so many people have said is a cornerstone, and even if you don't necessarily read like this, about understanding the waves that it had and the impact and how other people have been inspired and gone on in some of the things that perhaps I'm more familiar with. So that's why I got it. I was really lucky actually. I found it in a shop for, I think it was about £3, and I haven't been reading for it like religiously. I actually had a break and was reading some fiction, but this is my current tarot read. And I've had all sort of interruptions today, and the light had failed me temporarily, so I can't actually remember what I was saying, but essentially I actually found this for really cheap. I'm really I suppose surprised by some of the card explorations in a really great way as well, especially the majors. They've been really interesting. I can't remember what ones felt shorter, but overall I'm glad to have a chance to read it, and then it is probably one that I will keep and just have as a reference thing. I don't actually have loads of tarot books that are separate from decks, and I would like to remedy that because the ones that come with decks aren't necessarily my favourite, and I do prefer hard copies of things in the end because I had a bunch on Kindle and honestly I just don't look at them once I've read them. And finally, a tarot fiction, which I had to give a shout out to the Raven Boys, which is one of 4 in the Raven Cycle series, which I still haven't finished. I don't know what's wrong with me, folks. I just wasn't sustaining my fiction reading for the longest time. And then when I returned, I recently finished off the Shadow and Bone trilogy. So if you watch that video, then you know I have actually returned to reading fiction. I should have started here, but I did not. But anyway, I have read this one. Maggie is also the creator of the Raven's Prophecy, which is nearly a deck I shared. It is one of my favourites. I freaking love that deck so much. It is just an unsung hero in my tarot collection. There are quite a few tarot mentions, and it's not just in this book, although I haven't read them all. I know that there are tarot mentions throughout the whole series of these with various individuals and the family in there. You even get to hear them do a couple of like snippets of tarot readings, and it's very fun. I haven't thought much about critiquing it, but for the most part, from what I can remember, it makes sense, which would make sense being as Maggie has made several decks now. So yes, please no spoilers, because I am going to get round to it, and I actually own the rest of the series already. I was sweetly gifted this by a friend online many years ago now, and yeah, it's so good. It's so good. I have every faith that I will want the spin-off series after. I just need to get to it. Next up we have spreads, which took me a little longer, but purely because I tend to create a lot of spreads, and therefore if I'm reading with a spread, because I love freeform reading as well, then I tend to be testing a lot of my own because I need to make sure that they work okay before I put them out into the world. And that's kind of what's happened for me in the world of spreads. So we've got a long form spread, a short form spread, and an exercise spread. That's how I've done this time. So the long form spread is by the lovely Lindsay Mack, and it is called Radical Receiving Spread. It is a spread that everyone can see, which is why I'm sharing this one in particular. It wasn't on one of her paid offerings. It's no secret, I've said before, Lindsay Mack is one of my favourite go-to people to study the tarot alongside. I really love her podcast, Wild Soul Healing, and I have paid for 3 of her courses now, I think, as well. I think where Lindsay talks about her own experience going through therapy and has that kind of world informing some of how she approaches just life in general, and then of course her tarot practice. That's something that I really appreciate, admire, respect, can relate to. So yeah, I like the way she reads, and I really love long form spreads. So the reason that I wanted to share one is because they tend to be the spreads that I go to do actual work. Once I've worked with a spread initially, I will then work with it for days, so it will be out somewhere, or if I really need to pack it away, then I will take a picture of it, and I can work with the invitation and the contents of a spread for weeks before I go and do another. The prompts are: what work am I being invited to do with the Empress in this season of my life? What work am I being invited to do with death in this season of my life? How am I being invited to expand my capacity for pleasure, receiving, and sweetness? What, if anything, is preventing me from doing this? How can I lovingly lay those blocks on the proverbial compost pile? And finally, what kind of anchoring and support can I call in order to do this? That is my kind of spread, and I love the movement between the Empress and Death. I have found it to be a very poignant spread in particular, and one that I worked with for a long time, as I say, as is my process. Then we've got the short form spread, which is essentially 2 cards. Sometimes it's not both tarot, but for this I will just pull the 2. And essentially all I do is, the first one is the card where I'm at. So this is present, this is what's going on for me. And then the following card can be one of these things. It will either be support, advice or insight, or an amalgamation of those dependent on what's relevant. That's how I do a short form 2 card spread. And then finally, I'm not going to pull cards for this one because it will just be a mess, but it's called the 4 Queens, I believe. Now, I was introduced to this by friends, so unfortunately I couldn't find out where the spread came from and cannot give the originator their dues. If you know, then of course feel free to let me know. And the way that I was introduced to it is perhaps not how it goes either. So this is a 2-deck 4 Queen method. Now with the first deck, looking at the queens and actively picking which one I think is my most dominant, which one is my second most dominant or comfortable, which one do I feel is in shadow, and which one do I feel is almost entirely absent. Once I've pulled those and I've got my 4 queens set, then shuffling the other queens, or maybe just, you know, it's hard to shuffle 4 cards, mixing them up a bit, laying them out, going across them, and while they're face down, then pulling, okay, what one's my most dominant, my second most dominant, comfortable, my shadow, my absent, turning them over. And the exercise is then not only going through the process of why I chose what I chose, but how I feel about what came up on the cards when I actually pulled the cards, how those differ, where they differ, if any of them did actually sync up. And it's this whole glorious process that the 3 of us did on a private call once. And since then, I've done it with other courts as well. So I've done 4 pages in exactly the same way. I actually haven't done it with kings or knights, so perhaps I should give it a try. But I didn't want to make this too much longer. So those are my 3 spreads. For the next one, I decided to go for 1 tarot habit and 1 piece of paraphernalia. For the tarot habit, I actually have all of my tarot decks and obviously Oracle on a cyber library, and it's called 𝗪𝗲𝗄𝗏. I think that's how it's pronounced. I tried the other one that everyone uses. I didn't get on with it so much. It required too much of my time. This is very simple. And it basically gives me an overview of my collection in one go, which I can have visually as well. So you can add photos, or if it happens to be a mass market deck, it's quite easy to look it up online. And the reason that I do this tarot habit is it's a way for me to utilise my management of my decks and other things. I like to keep my decks around a certain number, and whilst I can see most of them at any given time just by looking around me now, they are in different nooks and crannies on different shelves. This is a bit more of a visual way, especially for the ones that are in bags, even though I know what everyone is, to just see. I'm a very visual person, and that helps me take stock, reflect, and just keep afloat and comfortable with the way that I like to have a relationship with owning decks. Also, another nifty thing that I've been able to do recently, which I'm very excited about because I'm a nerd, is add tags to them. So I've gone through and added tags to all of the tarot decks in particular, because the tarot and oracle are separate. And I can send the link to someone who is a potential client, and they can click filter and reading decks, and when they click reading decks, it will show only the decks that I tend to offer to clients in readings. that sort of takes it down from everything that's on there and makes it very accessible and useful for me in a business sense. So I really enjoy that as well. So that is a tarot habit. And the tarot paraphernalia, I'm going to go with tarot bags. Because I love a good tarot bag, basically. And the reason I love a good tarot bag is whilst I tend to like to keep my tarot in their boxes, sometimes their boxes just wear too much over time. Sometimes I have a deck that feels especially special and again, I'm not in love with the box. Or sometimes they don't come with a box straight off the bat. I really love embroidered bags. They are just exquisite and yummy. So this is by 𝗺cie𝗿𝗲. I think that she's picking up quite a lot of popularity in the community, so you've probably seen her bags around by this point. Also another very popular one, and the host and creator of our tag, I have this gorgeous one by the lovely 𝗪𝗁𝗵𝗺. I freaking adore this. I love that they're square. They're actually really easy and compact to like keep. I don't have one right in front of me to grab, but I also love Wheeler's wands. I have a few of her bags as well as a few of her wands. But there are a plethora of bag creators out in our community, and they're usually our very own community members. So it's a lovely way to support them as well. And there's kind of a bag for everything. So if you haven't seen one here, then there will be one. And last but not least, a piece of tarot advice, just because I didn't want to force myself to kind of like make up a card that I was particularly wanting to engage with at the moment. I've pretty much said most of the tarot advice I would give. So I was trying to think of something I hadn't said. And really it fell down to just trying not to let imposter syndrome or being new, those things might go hand in hand, or they can just pop up at different times, but trying not to let either of those lead to toxic comparisons, either that being how long others have been reading, or their rules, or their approach, or even as far as like followers and things like that as well. Firstly, if we're new, things take time. We all bring different things to our tarot practices as well, whether that's life experiences, cultures, beliefs, values, styles, taste. But yeah, I think I would like put it to people, if no one else could see your tarot practice, what would it be like? You know, what would it look like? What would bring you joy in it? What do you want from it? Those kind of questions, you know, if it's just for you away from everyone else, because that's the most important part of tarot practice, and the other stuff is, you know, bonuses. That's my little piece of tarot advice. I'm sure that people have said it before, but there you have it. And then it asks us to tag 5 people. And I could tag a zillion, and I do tag everyone who's watching. And I will say the same as Kelly as well. You don't have to be someone who participates with videos or posts or anything like that. You can comment your choices. I will genuinely read them and I'll respond. So do let me know what your choices would be. But the 5 people I decided to tag are Lark and Legend. I want to tag all 3 girlies from 3 Girls 1 Deck. And that is Peekaboo, Rose, Heather and Sunset Bow Tarot. And then I'm also going to tag Tarot Readings from a Bitch. I think that they'll get notified that they're tagged. So if you're watching this and you don't want to do it, it's fine. No hard feelings. But I'm tagging you if you do fancy it. Thank you to Kelly for the awesome tag. Thank you to everyone for hanging out and listening to me ramble. And I will see you again soon. Bye.